What's up, everybody? What's up? It has been a minute and haven't been on here very much lately. If you don't know what's been going on with me and my family, we have moved across the country from the Austin, Texas, Round Rock area all the way to Georgia. And so that has been a journey for sure, but we are getting settled here in Georgia. And man, I am excited to kind of get back online a little more consistently now. My wife and I, we've been trying to do Relatively Black and White. So that's a podcast. We got a YouTube channel, Instagram. So if you're not following that, go follow that. And you can catch up a little bit on what's been going on with us and this journey that we've been on. So, man, I'm excited to be back online with so many of you all today. As you come in, let me know that you're here. I am on StreamYard, so hopefully I'll be able to see all the comments on Facebook and on YouTube. If you're not aware, I do have a YouTube page. It's the same handle as all my others, which is at its_Evan B. So I'd love for you to follow me there. Today, I just wanted to talk really quickly about something that I think we can easily lose sight of if we're not careful, and that is make the main thing the main thing. It's easy to lose focus on what's important and focus on what's urgent. Like, this is, all of us have this issue, not just you, not just me. All of us have this issue of losing focus on what's most important and focusing on sometimes what's most urgent. It's also easy to lose focus on what's most important and focus on what's comfortable. And we see this a lot today too, where there's something that's really, really important, but it's going to take a little bit of being outside of our comfort zone, being a little uncomfortable. And so we focus more on what makes us comfortable than what's most important. We do this with our careers, right? So we have a career path. We know that, this step leads to that step leads to the next step, but something in this step becomes uncomfortable, or something in this stage of life becomes urgent. And so we lose sight of the most important for the most comfortable and the most urgent. We also do this with our finances. Like, this is a clear and easy one that we can all relate to, right? Like, we have a goal to save this much money or to invest this much or to purchase this home or whatever the financial goal is, but there's something urgent that we then spend our money on. Maybe it's going out to eat. Maybe it's clothing, a car, whatever it is. Something urgent takes away what's most important. Or maybe it's something just comfortable. Like, it's going to be a little uncomfortable to downsize financially your life and kind of go without a little bit to reach a more important goal. And so we sacrifice that most important for the most urgent or the most comfortable. We also do this in our relationships, especially in marriages. We see this a lot of what's most important and how God wants us to operate within our marriages. But then there's something urgent. Maybe it's a train of thought, our own needs, all these different things come in. Or maybe it's what's most comfortable. It's most comfortable to relax and not put in the work and not do what you need to do. And so we sacrifice the most important for either what's most urgent or what's most comfortable. And we do this with our faith. Like, a lot of Christians, especially, like, we don't want to admit this, but we do this with our faith. We want to grow spiritually. We want to grow closer to God. We want to become more generous, more giving, more forgiving, whatever the case may be. And then what happens is there's something urgent that comes up, or something that's causing us to get outside of our comfort zone, and we lose sight of the more important goal of becoming more like Jesus. So today I want to share with you a couple verses, couple scriptures. Matthew chapter 22. I feel like, I used to talk about this all the time, and it's so foundational. It's so real. It's so strong. It's so powerful that I think it's good for all of us to just keep coming back to this. So Matthew chapter 22, verse 34 through 40 says this: "But when the Pharisees heard that he, being Jesus, had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment." Now, you've probably heard this if you've been in church or even around Christians any amount of time. Hopefully, you've heard this story, you've heard this verse, you've understood these scriptures at some level. Let's talk about this for a second. Jesus is asked, what's most important? Like, what is the top of the food chain in my life? Like, what should I be thinking about? What should I be focused on? What should be my goals and values and all those things? Like, what should they be based around? What does all of this boil down to? And Jesus says to love God with everything that you have, with all your heart. So with all your affection, with all your soul, which is your mind, your will, and your emotions. So all of your consciousness, all of your intentionality, love God. And with all your mind, with all your thoughts, with all your understanding, love God. We also know that to love God is not about an emotion, it's not about a feeling, it's about obedience to God. And we'll talk about that in another video in another day. But this is really important, and this is the great commandment. This is the most important thing, is to love God with everything that you have and everything that you are. Now, if you've ever heard me read these scriptures, you probably can finish some of these sentences, because this just blows me away. Because Jesus was only asked, what is the great commandment? Like, what does this boil down to? What's the one thing? What's the most important? But then in verse 38, it says, this is the great and first commandment. Verse 39 says, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus wasn't asked, what's the top two? He was asked, what is the number one most important thing for a believer? And we're told to love God with everything that you are. And then Jesus adds this. Like, he wasn't asked, he just volunteered it. He adds, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So there's a lot in this. We're not going to take time in this video to go through all of this and all of what this means. I want to point out a few things, though. You can't love your neighbor unless you first love yourself. So to love your neighbor as you love yourself, it's important to have a healthy, righteous, spiritual self-love. And what I mean by that is not arrogance. It's not being conceited. It is understanding who you are, who God's made you to be, so that you can then love out of that. There's somebody in my life right now that their words, their actions are clearly showing a lack of love for themselves. And the way that it's coming out is anger, frustration, and just all of those types of things towards other people. Like, they're not able to love these other people. And it looks like it's because of the other people. But in actuality, it's because they are not loving themselves. And until we love ourselves in a righteous way, in a biblical way, we're not able to then love our neighbor. But this is amazing that Jesus would add loving our neighbor into loving God, and like the greatest commandment. Because so many times as Christians, like, we just think about loving God. Like, we need to go to church, we need to pray, we need to read our Bible, we need to be generous with our finances, we need to be spiritual people who don't sin and don't do these things and don't do those things. But Jesus was like, yeah, that can become urgent, or maybe even that can even put you in a comfort zone. But what's most important is to love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so that's obviously how it's said in the book of Matthew. But in Luke chapter 10, I want to read this to you, because I could talk about this all day, every day. I love these verses. I love this story. Luke chapter 10, verse 25, it says, and behold, a lawyer stood up to put him, being Jesus, to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Could you imagine Jesus asking you what you thought about the scriptures? Like, man, Jesus, I don't know that I really have an opinion. Whatever your opinion is will be my opinion. Because Jesus here is saying, like, how do you read? What do you think the answer is? Like, according to the scriptures, what do you think the right answer to your question is? In verse 27, and he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So he answers correctly. He answers how Jesus answered in the book of Matthew. Verse 28 says, and he said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Do this. Not believe this, not think this, not even agree with this or try this, but do it and you will live. In verse 29, it says this, but he, being the man who's trying to figure this out from Jesus, he desiring to justify himself. Now, let me pause right there, because it's very dangerous to desire to justify yourself. Whenever you're desiring to justify yourself, you're putting yourself in a position where it's going to be easier to twist your thinking, twist your vision, twist even what the Bible says to try to justify yourself, justify your actions, justify your way of thinking, your way of moving, what you did, what you didn't do, what you wanted to do. All of these things become much easier to be manipulated whenever you want to justify yourself. And so what makes it even more dangerous is when you want to justify yourself to Jesus. And we'll probably talk about this in a later video, but this is why you get scriptures such as the tradition of man makes the power of God of none effect. This is why you get people who will discount what the Bible says based on what their experiences are. So, for example, I've never been healed by God. I've never seen anybody healed by God. Therefore, I believe God no longer heals. Well, does 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24, is it in the Bible or not in the Bible? Is Isaiah chapter 53, is that in there or not? Like, are we going to go with what we've experienced, or are we going to go with what the word says? Because when we want to justify ourselves, it's much easier to go with what we've experienced, because we can explain that, we can articulate that, and it's always dangerous. Never allow your experiences to shape your theology, because the moment that your experiences or your intellect starts to shape your theology, you're like what James says, you're this double-minded man, unstable in all your ways, and that man should expect to receive nothing from the Lord. I know that's harsh. I didn't say it. James said it. So take that up with Jesus and James. Here we go. He, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Remember, we're supposed to love God with everything that we are, and then we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. So who is our neighbor? Many of you all know this. Jesus goes on to tell this story. He replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, there's so much in this. I want to preach this so bad, but I'm trying to keep this video within a certain time limit. So let's keep moving. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. He passed by on the other side. He sees this man that has been attacked, that has been beaten, that has been left for dead, and this religious man, this priest, and if we had time, we'd go through and show you that this priest was most likely leaving a religious worship service that he himself likely conducted. In other words, today, it might be like a pastor who just had church, walks by someone in need, left for dead, and he goes by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, pass by on the other side. A Levite, again, if we had time, we could show you all this and break all this down. But a Levite was someone who likely was helping out. We might call it serving within a church service, and leaving that service, likely going home, and he comes across this person. He sees the person, but he passes by on the other side. So essentially, the church saw the opportunity for somebody hurt and somebody beaten, somebody broken, and they chose to pass by on the other side. I'm not going to say this continues to happen. I'm not going to bash the church. I love the church and I love Christians. But this is the story that Jesus tells when he's trying to explain to us what it means to love our neighbor. But a Samaritan, who would have been this person's arch enemy, would have been his rival, a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Now, all three people saw this man beaten and left for dead, hurting, laying in the road. But the Samaritan, his arch enemy, saw him differently than the religious folks. If you're a Christian watching this, please, I beg you, can we please start to see our neighbors with a little bit of compassion? Can we take a lesson from the Samaritan and see those who are hurting, whether you think they deserve to be hurting or not, whether you think they brought it on themselves or not, whether you think they should have done that, shouldn't have done that, they deserve this or not, because we don't know a whole lot about this person left other than he was walking along a dangerous road and he was beaten up and left for dead. Did he pick the fight? Did he talk junk to the robbers? Like, did he deserve it? We don't know. That's not the point. And those people that you come across every day, whether it be online or in your own life, that are hurting, that are not able to love their neighbors, and it's coming out as anger, as frustration, and maybe they're unlikable, or maybe you just so disagree with them that you have a hard time even liking them, much less loving them. I'm challenging you to be like the Samaritan and change how you see them. All three saw this person. The Samaritan saw it differently than the religious. The Samaritan saw it with compassion. He saw him with compassion, and he went to him. He didn't avoid him. He didn't go by on the other side. He actually goes to this person who's hurting and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he sent him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of it. He got in the trenches with this guy that was his enemy, that he didn't like, and that guy probably didn't like him just because of Jews, Samaritan, all of that stuff that we still see today. He was willing to not only see it differently, but he was willing to act on it differently. He actually goes to the guy and gets messy because he's bounding up his wounds. He's left for dead. He's clearly bleeding. He's laying probably in dirt. Like, he's getting messy with this guy. Why? Because he saw with compassion. He saw with compassion. Man, I promise you, your homes, your communities, your schools, your churches would be different if we as Christians would just begin to see those who are hurting and broken as people that deserve our compassion, and to go to them and be willing to get messy with them, put them on his own animal. Like, he's willing to give up some of his privilege, some of his accomplishments to serve someone who in most cases would have been his enemy. And then he takes him to an inn, and he's even willing to give financially to help this person out. Like, if you're a Christian, this is not the way most Christians operate. This is not the way we operate most of the time. It should be, but unfortunately, it's not. We want to stick to the Levites and the priests, and we want to go by on the other side from those who are not like us, even if they're hurting and broken and left for dead. And we're like, if you want us to see them as compassionate and forgive them and pray for them, we might agree to that. If you want us to go to them and get in their space and get messy and get our hands dirty with them, you've probably went too far. If you want us to do all of that and sacrifice some of what God has blessed us with and what we have earned and what we have deserved, now you've really went too far. If you want to add on top of that, giving financially to be a blessing to that person, well, now that's just ridiculous. But yet this is the story that Jesus tells to explain to us how we are to love our neighbor. I love this part. It says, and the next day. And this is where, if you're like super Christian and you've done these other things, this is where we will often miss it if we haven't already missed it before. The next day, after all the emotion has come down, and we're no longer on this high of being able to help somebody in need, and the adrenaline of seeing somebody left for dead and being able to do something about it. Now it's the next day. All of that is gone. We're going back to our lives. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. He comes back the next day. It's not just a one-time blessing. It's not just a one-time prayer. It's not just a one-time getting into somebody's life, but coming back the next day. If we want to really keep what's most important, if we want to make the main thing, then we have to keep coming back the next day. We have to be willing to be sacrificial with our life to bless even, and maybe even especially, our enemies the next day. Being willing to give whatever we can, whatever we're able to, whether it be of ourselves, whether it be what we own, whether it be our finances, our prayers, our time, our compassion to other people day after day, coming back the next day. He said, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? Which at this point, it's obvious in the story, right? In verse 37, he said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you, and I think he's saying that to us now, you, me, us, go and do likewise. Again, don't go and believe, don't go and try, don't go and think, but go and do likewise. How can you make sure that today you don't pass by on the other side of those people in your life that you don't like, that don't like you, that whatever the disagreements are, whatever the disconnect is, that you see them hurting? You have a choice. For whatever reason, Jesus chose to use the religious to say that they pass by on the other side. Let's be people that follow Jesus in such a way that he can't use us as that example, and he wouldn't want to use us as that example. Today, I believe that today you will have an opportunity to pass by on the other side. You'll have an opportunity where you'll see someone in some form, some kind of need, and you will be in a position to help in some way, shape, or form. Look for that opportunity. Be intentional with that opportunity. Make sure that you don't pass by on the other side. What are you going to do today to make the main thing in your life? I'm sure as we've talked about this, there's somebody that pops up in your mind that you're saying, man, that person is really hard to love. That person is angry. I don't like that person. We don't get along. We don't believe the same way. I don't even know how they call themselves a Christian, or they're so far away from Christ, and they're this and they're that, and I just got to keep my space from them. Listen, Jesus in you is greater than whatever is in the world, whatever you think is in that person. So let's be intentional today to make the main thing. What's the main thing? Love God with everything that you have. And Jesus adds to that main thing. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so that may mean today making the decision to grow closer to God and loving him more. That may mean today making the necessary adjustments, getting the necessary help to love yourself so that you're able to love somebody else. Or that may simply mean love your neighbor. Like, do it. Don't just believe it. Don't just say it. Don't just think it. Don't just have good intentions, but do it today. Make a decision to do it. Make the main thing the main thing. Hey, I am on all the social media stuff at its_Evan B. I'd love to connect with you guys there. I have a YouTube page. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you're watching on Facebook, I do have a YouTube page. I'd love for you to just subscribe. I'm going to be putting more stuff on there. As I said, my wife and I, we've been doing a podcast called Relatively Black and White. And so I'd love for you to connect with us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on Instagram and on YouTube, Relatively Black and White. There's a lot of good content on there, and we're going to keep going with that. Hey, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to try to get more consistent with this. I plan on being back tomorrow, and just try to empower you, encourage you, inspire you. So if you enjoyed this, make sure that you like it, make sure that you share it. I'd love to hear in the comments maybe some ways that you're going to be intentional about not passing by on the other side today, and ways that you are going to make the main thing the main thing. Man, thank you so much for watching. Can't wait to be with you guys again. See ya.